Welcome to Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name is Clint Button. I'm a granite sculptor. Welcome to video number 19 of the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Finished off the last video showing you about working this edge. I'm going to work these other two edges probably without showing you much, and then I'll try to do a little more close-up work. We'll talk about establishing this front edge. How you produce these edges and the order that you produce them, just like the order that you produce the panel, where we're going to do the edges first, try to get them pretty well straightened up and almost where they need to be, so you got just a little bit of room to push them. It's important to do them in the right order. Finishing the panel first doesn't make a lot of sense, because if you have a failure on the edge, then you've got to redo the panel. So that's what we're going to do. You can also sight this edge fairly easily to see how straight it is. Now, you can always go down deeper. This first edge, really, you can put it wherever you want. After this, we've got to decide whether we're going to turn the stone this way and use this and this as 90-degree references, or if we're going to turn the stone all the way to where this is on the bottom, because if this ends up being, we get this flat, theoretically we can just decide about our level on the joint, use this as the joint and level this face down here where it's sitting, and then we can cut the top to the level and they'll be parallel. That's a little bit easier. We still have to have, make sure that this agrees here. If this agreement's good, then cutting a parallel face, should automatically be 90 degrees to it. But we got to keep checking all along, because wedges do come loose. If you bump into it, it's important to have a comfortable work position. That's why I use the riser where I can, because I don't have to strain as much. And so I'm not leaning on the stone, I'm working the stone. If I'm on the stone, it's more likely to move. So, as I've said, I'm not going to be exhaustive on the video of the process of stuff I've already shown. I hope that's the way I can do it throughout this virtual apprenticeship, so that you're not bored. I mean, me running the hand machine is me running the hand machine. I may show you the tools I'm using to progress through, but you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to put some work into this. So, anxious to get started and get this cut, hopefully get this face done pretty quick, and then we can move on to the next one. I do want to bring up, and this is sort of an aside, it depends a lot on what your subject matter is in terms of your studio. I've got a lot of flowers planted around my studio, between here and the house. Most of them, just about all of them, are perennials. They're bulbs. There's lots of irises, lots of daffodils, lily of the valley. There's snapdragons, bread and butter snapdragons, stuff like that. And some of these are flowers. We've got some, and then we've got another flower garden up front. These are forms that you often encounter, at least in memorial work. Floral work in granite is a very special place. You can either carve really nice flowers or they're not really nice. And you look at some of the old masters' works and it's just breathtaking. As for what they did, how delicate they carved them, and how soft they can make the stone look. So having the flowers around, it makes the place look nice, but it also gives you a way to see them and really be familiar with the forms, to know that we had a request for a project recently, and the scale was wrong. They wanted life-size blossoms on this big bouquet of flowers, but they wanted the bouquet to be like 4 feet long, and the stems are only about maybe 18 to 24 inches long naturally. And so to have 4 foot long stems on the flowers didn't make any sense. So the patron was going to revisit her composition to see, what we could do to restructure it. And you've got to be able to think ahead like that, so that you don't accept something and then carve it and then all of a sudden realize that the enthusiasm you had at the beginning, you missed the obvious. I keep pointing out the obvious, the mundane, these little things. You've got to be able to notice them. So plant some flowers would be cool. I mean, I love having flowers around the studio. And let's cut some stone and make this flat, and it'll be pretty. Cutting this corners are really dangerous because you can't push out. You always have to push into the stone and work them from both sides in order to develop that corner and hopefully not blow it off, because you do lose corners on occasion, and so you've got to be able to do them right. You need sharp tools when you're setting your corners in, and you got to be really careful. If you have a wide tool, you've got less chance of the tool slipping. It'll capture a little better. And it'll also slow the cut as you go in. A narrower tool will cut faster, like if I used a regular straight chisel instead of a round chisel. But this will give me a little more control on this top. I'm going to start by wasting it off with this, and then I'll level it up with the flat chisel. Once again, a 3/4 machine. Work down. Don't try to take the whole thing off at once. Take a little and a little and a little to get down to it. We're going to work this away. I haven't tipped this edge at all yet. I just worked and beveled the inside, and I'm going to try to get this down closer to where I want it to be before I worry about tipping this edge. Still, I'm only holding the chisel like this. I'm not grabbing it. I'm not clenching my machine. I'm holding it very careful. The tool here. Okay. That's how you cut that corner off. Now, it's important to not force this, because we don't know how deep we're going to be, and so even going in here, we don't want to push out and start something, a crack, or weaken it back here, because we could knock that whole edge, start a crack, and then when we push back and we get where we want to be, and this will be at least the third side we cut, we may have to sink that panel even more in order to catch up. So now that I've got that corner kind of set in, I'm going to level it, go down just a little bit more to try to get it sort of in plane with the rest of this. I'm going to go ahead and tip the back. I did take a saw and put a number of line little cuts, and it blew out on the back side even after I sharpened my saw on the grinder, like I told you when I squared the blade. I still got blowout that's a 1/4 inch down into this stone. So that stone is really sensitive to sawing, so I've got to be careful, because even if I don't have the blowout issues, if it's fracturing the stone, even though it's holding together, then I've still got problems when I start to get down to that last level. So work on your stone and understand what it does. That's why different stones have different characteristics, and you can't treat all of them the same. Back to work. When you're this is more good times to practice. At some point you're going to have to cut, if you ever cut like on a polished stone and you carve a bas relief or you carve something up to the polish, you're going to have to control your chisels enough that you don't skip and hit the polish or bump over from the niche to the side when you're cutting the edge. You've got to control it, and you've got to learn there's a balance between holding the tool tight and controlling the tool. You want to control the tool, not necessarily hold it tight. And this is one of the problems that people run into when they've got these big old mittens on. It's got gel in them that's going to save their hands from vibration damage and everything. You want to wear them, that's your choice. I don't wear them. I don't have the control. I wear gloves on occasion, but I wear gloves and I cut the tips off so I can feel them. But this is a good opportunity to practice how much control you've got on an edge. Even if it's not polished like this, you can control what you're doing and not make a misstrike, because if you misstrike into a polish, that's really a problem. That can be a failed job. So, practice. Now that I've got this edge just about pushed back all the way here, I went ahead and got the inside kind of leveled up. It's closer to where it needs to be. I may need to go a little bit more, but I've still got a hump right here. If I go with either a scraper or a bush chisel, and I work vertically on this to lower that face, what's going to happen is it's going to blow out here. So I want to tip this to a 45 to strengthen the edge to keep it from blowing out. And then I'll work down until I've almost removed that 45, and then I'll repeat it. I'll do that and I'll progressively work it down, and that'll help keep me from having a big blowout down here on this face. Even though this is practice, you got to get good so when you do it on a proper face, you don't have a mistake. You also need to watch, I don't know if you can see right here, just on the edge of the screen, that's a great big black flake. It just falls apart. If that was actually my corner, I wouldn't be real happy. I'd have to be super careful doing that, and that's when you get into having to round the corner off a little bit to capture it. This will get wasted off, but I'm probably going to have that somewheres on this stone. Part of the problem of a mahogany or a big flake stone, you don't like it, because stuff like that, it doesn't tolerate it very well. You're out to have a crystal run right through a corner or an edge or through a carved detail, and it'll just fail. So, you've been warned. Okay, 3 sides are roughed in. Now, I can look at this. I know it's not flat. It isn't rough, horrible, but it isn't true or level at all. I'm not worried about that yet. We're gonna fix all that. I left room so we could take care of this stone and do it right. Now, the important part now is to set this in, because this is a finished edge. We're gonna cut this. When we cut this down to level, this edge isn't gonna get touched again in theory. We're gonna leave it right there. And so we've got to get this put together. There's some crown here, which is great, because that means I've got material I can work off and slowly creep up on that straight edge. I'm going to do the same thing here. And in theory, you know, it's an even crown, but there's some discrepancy. But I'm going to work this off just like I did these other 3. I've spent some time practicing, and I know what this stone does and doesn't do. These large flakes, typical of any mahogany, you'll have some flakes like the black ones that are just almost powdery soft. Then you'll have some quartz beside them. It's really hard, and so you'll push, and that one soft thing will go right through, and then you'll hit a hard piece, and it's real easy to have, you know, inconsistencies. You can break things out. You'll probably find out in general that you have less blowout on an edge that's been split than an edge that's been sawed, because this has already been stressed to the point of fracture. And so whatever's left is typically more sound if it hasn't been struck, if it doesn't have a bunch of point marks on it. Over here, they've sawed through everything. They didn't care. They just cut it. And so there could be half already damaged crystals. And I've got a couple of picks on this edge. They're still high. I don't think it'll be a problem, but that's part of the way this goes. So let's start on this finish edge. After I've had practice on 3 sides, we're going to make this one really nice. And once we get this into shape, or it's pretty close to this panel, we're going to start double checking our plumb to make sure this is still great before we set through and level this all out. You got to make sure to keep track, because if you bump into it or lean against it, but it's a pretty solid, it's not going anywhere. That's what you want. So let's cut this edge. First thing I'm going to do is try to get a fairly straight line across here at the bottom of this bevel, all the way across, so I can start keeping track of it, because this matters. So I have to be able to keep track of it. This is the low spot, so I'm going to work the whole thing down until I reach that low spot, make it straight across, pretty straight, and then I'm going to work on the back. Perfectly straight, but that gives me a reference to start. Now I just start wasting this off towards the back. I'll adjust this line as I need to. You got to take both corners off, work them in. And you're better off to get your corners cut, work towards your center. You cut one corner and cut all the way, and then find out you got some shift. Get your corners off and pull the middle down to match it. Something else to mention. Y'all have been following along and paying attention. I said a chisel will last 1 to 2 hours if you keep it sharp, okay? There's sharp work and then there's regular work. Now, this rough in that I've done so far, I'm getting ready to go through another tool here. But I haven't changed chisels yet, but I haven't had to keep them terribly sharp. Now that I'm on edges and I'm cutting edges and corners, they got to be really sharp. And you'll end up having a tool change quite a bit really fast. So you'll find out that when I say it's 1 to 2 hours, that's an average. And depending on how much you sharpen it or how much you use it, it may last a lot longer than that. I'm talking about on the stone time. I'm not talking about time on the clock. I'm talking about when you're actually carving. But if you keep them sharp, they disappear quick. Sort of your green wheels. You'll go through a ton of green wheels, and you got to figure that into your consumables, because you can't get around it. You have to keep your tools sharp. There's an edge. I hope you saw towards the end, I had a piece pop off right here on the outside. No big deal. If that had been over here, I would have been pretty unhappy. Now, this isn't finished. We still got to square up this panel to make it level, make it flat, make it level, make sure it's 90 degrees to this. But you can see it's a pretty good edge. It's got some pick, some failures. So if you tip it, you know, and tip it just, you know, like a 1/16 of an inch, just enough to take the edge off so it rounds it just a little bit. That's pretty normal. When you see stuff that's pushed back, you know, a fat 1/4 inch or even a 1/2 inch, you know, that's not cool. That's not what you're supposed to do. So, but this is how you do your edges. So now you got this edge done. I'm just going to level this up, and we'll probably start that in the next video. Put this one together and get it out. But this is how you cut your edges. Practice, leave a perimeter, work it away from both sides, tip this edge, work down to the bottom edge of your bevel, which is what this is. And if you sight along this bottom edge, it's got just a little bit of crown. There's about 1/8 of an inch crown right in the center, which is great because that looks like it mimics the panel pretty well. So when I pull this down, we should be great. But before we move forward, we're going to make sure this is really secure, that this is plumb. We're going to make sure this is where we want it to be, even if we've got to go, because we've got a couple of spots. It's a little low right here, and this is still low, and so I may have to sort of do a wash with a 9-point and reestablish my flats to get them where I want them, and then just clean it all off, just like we did with this one, and then we'll be all set. So, square in a block. Rough block of stone here at Carolina Sculpture Studio. My name's Clint Button, as part of the Virtual Stone Carving Apprenticeship. Thanks for coming in.